After diplomatic measures against Pakistan for the Pahalgam terror attacks, Prime Minister Modi has given the army a free hand to prepare a military response as the US, UK, Saudi Arabia, and other countries call Delhi and Islamabad to try and diffuse rising tensions. Can international diplomacy deter Delhi? And what are India's options and the challenges to them ahead? Hello and welcome. I'm Suhasini Haider and this is Worldview at the Hindu. Now, 10 days since the terror attacks in Pahalgam, security forces are still combing across Jammu and Kashmir for the terrorists who gunned down 26 men, most of them tourists, on April the 22nd. Last week, Worldview had looked at the diplomatic measures announced by India and the responses to them from Pakistan. This week, Prime Minister Modi has already met with the chiefs of the Army, Navy and Air Force again, giving them what sources called a free hand to prepare military operations, indicating that the government's plan still remains to attack Pakistan. It's about when and not if. Pakistan's Prime Minister and other leaders have said an attack from India is imminent. They vowed an equal response. With tensions rising, a number of countries made calls to both Delhi and Islamabad. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemned the attacks, but then he called for India and Pakistan to work together to de-escalate tensions. US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth spoke to Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, and he said unequivocally that the US stands with India. US Vice President J.D. Vance had a more complex statement to make. Listen in.
Sure. I'm worried about any time you see a hotspot breaking out, especially between two nuclear powers. We've obviously been in close contact with our friends in India and Pakistan. Our hope here is that India responds to this terrorist attack in a way that doesn't lead to a broader regional conflict. And we hope, frankly, that Pakistan, to the extent that they're responsible, cooperates with India to make sure that the terrorists, sometimes operating in their territory, are hunted down and dealt with. That's how we hope this unfolds. We're obviously in close contact. We'll see what happens.
And then countries like the UK, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, all issuing statements of concern over rising tensions, calling for de-escalation. All eyes, however, are on China. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke to Pakistan's Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar. He said China fully understands Pakistan's legitimate security concerns and supports Pakistan in safeguarding its sovereignty and security interests. He also called for an impartial investigation and, of course, the de-escalation of tensions. Now, obviously, some words of concern for New Delhi there. China's role will be particularly significant. It is a country that borders both India and Pakistan and has troops on the line of actual control with India. This is the first such flare-up between India and Pakistan since the LAC standoff and the Galwan clashes. And the Pahalgam attack also comes just as India and China are working on a rapprochement and just announced the restart of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra for Indians to Tibet in June. As China hopes for India's cooperation in dealing with US tariffs, it certainly becomes more interesting about what kind of diplomacy we're going to see between Delhi, Beijing, Islamabad as well. All indications remain, despite all these calls for de-escalation, that New Delhi is firm about a military response at the time of its choosing. Although perhaps the longer a response takes, the more tenuous international support may become. And this will call for consistent diplomacy by New Delhi in the weeks ahead. So what could some of those options be? Analysts have spoken of India's response as a range or a combination of several options. And of course, along with them, there will be a diplomatic maneuver as well. To begin with, an aerial bombing or missile strikes on terror installations and infrastructure, a cross-LOC army commando operation, for example, a drone strike, or a surgical strike on a Lashkar-e-Toiba senior leader like Hafiz Saeed. There are also some challenges to worry about. And one, of course, is the fact that there's lack of a surprise element on the timing as it comes after what seems to be a deliberate provocation coming across from Pakistan. Second, being unprepared for Pakistan's counter-retaliation. As in 2019, where India had to scramble jets when Pakistani jets tried to come back across the LOC, and now particularly given the nature of Pakistan's Army Chief Asim Munir. He's seen as particularly unpredictable and is actually under pressure at present. Asim Munir, always seen as a hawk on the issue of India, and more recently seen giving those speeches very rhetorical about the two-nation theory, as well as Kashmir being a jugular vein. In addition, he's under some political pressure given the attack on the Jafar Express in Balochistan in March, but also the continuing popularity of Imran Khan, who was seen as a rival when he was prime minister. There's also the question of China's involvement, although analysts believe that that is unlikely, that China would get involved between India and Pakistan, certainly on the military front. India must also consider a raft of diplomatic measures to continue, like keeping up the conversations with friendly countries, but equally with countries that can be intermediaries with Pakistan, given that there's very little bilateral contact. At the United Nations, a UN Security Council statement was actually a bit watered down. It didn't mention the TRF, the group that claimed responsibility for the Pahalgam attack, but another resolution, or one at the UN General Assembly, is still an option. A UN Security Council designation for the resistance front, the TRF, is now required, and India should go back to the UN with that and gather its allies for it, and also to the Financial Action Task Force, which had, by putting Pakistan on its grey list for 2008, 2009, then 2012 to 2015, and then 2015 to 2018, had been able to work on Pakistan's allowing funding for terror groups on its territory. Now, this week I discussed all these issues with two former officials who probably know better. Former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Sharad Sabharwal, and Lieutenant General Dipender Hooda, who was GOC&C for the Northern Command during the 2016 strikes. I began by asking them if there are lessons from past responses to terror strikes that must be taken forward, including from 2008, when India didn't carry out a military response but developed international pressure on Pakistan, and then those strikes in 2016 and 2019. Listen in.
Let me tell you about 2008, very briefly, the template that worked for de-escalation. Initially, they completely denied. They were not even willing to acknowledge that Ajmal Kasab, the lone gunman caught by us, was their national. But slowly, I think international pressure built, as I said earlier, because nationals of other countries had also been killed. India was able to mobilize that pressure. No, there was no publicized punitive activity. But that pressure resulted in Pakistan acknowledging not only that Kasab was with their national, but also ordering an investigation by their federal investigation agency. It's at this stage that I went as High Commissioner in early April 2009. June of 2009, they gave us a dossier, a 30-page dossier, Rahman Malik, the then Interior Minister, in which they acknowledged for the first and the last time that the attack was mounted from their territory, conspiracy hatched, and attack launched by Lashkar-e-Toiba. And they gave us elaborate details of, training and, where the boat was launched near the Karachi coast, the first ride, which took them and brought them to Mumbai, etc., etc. We resumed dialogue in March 2011, and General Hooda would bear me out that 2012 had the lowest level of violence on the line of control and in Jammu and Kashmir since the turn of the century. But of course, what I am not sure about is whether that offers any possibilities for today. First of all, it's not clear whether Pakistan would be willing to do even what it did then, and admitted that was a big thing. Pakistan had never done it earlier and has never done it since then. And secondly, whether that kind of action would be acceptable to our government.
After 2016, Pakistanis said nothing has happened. So we had planned for, what kind of reaction could come from the other side. But once that statement was made, we said, look, possibly we are not going to see any overt action from Pakistan. 2019, I think, sort of taught us that there will be a retaliation. There will be a response from Pakistan. In fact, if you look at Pakistan writings, they talk about post-2019 a strategy of quid pro quo plus. So they say we will react in an equal manner plus a little more if India does something. So I think as we contemplate actions now, we need to one clearly prepare for that. If we are going to do something militarily, there is going to be a response. And so, how is that retaliation to be looked at? If there is escalation, can we manage that escalation at different levels? I thought after 2019 we hadn't looked at this aspect enough, so there was a bit of a sort of a hasty reaction to when Pakistan, carried out a retaliation. These are things that we'll need to look at. What's the lowest level of military force which can be considered a success from our side? So some of these things are, I think, Swasni, need to be gone into. Now people suddenly start talking about let's take POK and all. I think it's that those are things that are a bit far-fetched.
General Lahuda, could I just ask you, you said maybe taking POK or taking posts in POK is a stretch at the next level. Do you think a surgical strike on an identified, designated individual like Hafiz Saeed, the head of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, is a possibility?
Yeah, it's a possibility. If we have that kind of intelligence, if we have that kind of capacity, capability, like the US has in taking out top leadership, it's possible. I'm not sure we have that kind of capability, capacity to be able to do that. But surely, I mean, that's fair game, if I can put it that way. That's a legitimate target for us.
Yeah, Ambassador Sabharwal, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, very briefly, I think about 2016 and 19, we also need to draw some lessons on what impact these actions had. Obviously, they have an impact. They introduce uncertainty in the minds of Pakistan's terror planners. They lull the terror activity to some extent, etc., etc. But it's very clear in the light of what happened later on or what happened now, that those kind of actions do not have the capacity to secure an enduring change in Pakistan's behavior. I think
and that, of course, remains the question whether it is possible to craft a diplomatic and military response to cross-border terror that isn't just about revenge, retaliation, or a short-term deterrence, but brings about an end to cross-border terrorism itself. You can hear more of that conversation in the Hindu's Parley podcast on the website and read the transcript of that conversation at www.thehindu.com as well. So what's Worldview's take? As a rising economy that is respected worldwide, India needs to consider all punitive action against Pakistan in terms of its effectiveness and avoid being equated with Pakistan through operations that target civilians or lead to an enduring destabilization of the region. That's a tall order, but it comes with the territory of being a regional power with its eye on the global high table. Time for some reading recommendations. The first is from my guest on that Parley talk, Sharad Sabharwal. It's called India's Pakistan Conundrum, Managing a Complex Relationship. It's a must read, particularly about that period between 2009 and 2013. The second, these are reference books, but you can always turn to them. One is called Negotiating India's Landmarks. This is by former diplomat Avtar Singh Bhasin, but it has a chapter on the Simla Agreement, for example. But there's also a book called India-Pakistan Neighbors at Odds, and that includes all the agreements between them. And it's something that if you're following the relationship, you should actually have. Another book is called Surgical Strike Across the LOC. This is by Lieutenant General Satish Dua, who was there, I think, in the 15th Corps. By a former diplomat to Pakistan, the High Commissioner to Pakistan, The People Next Door by T.C.A. Raghavan, and by another High Commissioner, Ajay Bisaria, there's the book Anger Management. I've spoken about that before. So we hope you enjoy reading all of these and do join us again here on Worldview from the team. Thanks for watching.